I'd never been, you could say, beat up like that before. And it wasn't like he was trying to hurt me, but it was actually being around somebody who expected more from me than I expected from myself.
Welcome back to the Atom Experiment, where we explore the skills, stories, and science behind unlocking your full potential. Today's a new type of episode where you're going to hear from someone who has inspired me with their own journey of taking on massive challenges. So we get to hear about what he learned while beaten and bloody on the mat of an Aikido dojo while pursuing his black belt. You're going to hear stories from when he was in combat search and rescue, jumping out of planes into dangerous waters, including his training process and training plans. You'll get some of the powerful techniques he learned while working under a philosopher in London, and so much more. My guest today is Cody Cerny. Cody spent 9 years in combat search and rescue in the United States Air Force Special Operations. As a pararescue helicopter team leader, Cody was an advisor to 7 countries as a technical rescue and medical instructor. In 2014, Cody was awarded the Pararescueman of the Year for the 48th Operations Group. He's also a 2-time recipient of the Air Medal, which is awarded by the President of the United States. That was in 2012 and 2013. These are only a few of the awards that Cody got while serving his country and growing as a human. He also graduated the U.S. Air Force Dive School for rigorous combat dive operations, the Halo Military Freefall School, Intensive Combat Training and Survival School, and the Paramedic EMT program. Seriously, this dude is incredible. Cody also holds his black belt in Aikido. So today, Cody works with the world's largest organizations to produce breakthrough results they previously thought were impossible. But I'll let Cody tell you more about that. So, ready to do this? All right, let's go. All right, Cody, I am so excited to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for being here.
Really great to be here, Adam. Thanks.
So today we're here to talk about, as always, unlocking potential. And you and I had a really fascinating conversation recently, one-on-one, where you talked about how the beginning part of your career when you were in combat search and rescue in the Air Force Special Operations, that your focus, and you can describe this how you'd like, was to be the best in the world at saving people. Can you talk to us about what that meant to you and means to you today?
Yeah, and that's an idea that actually grew over a number of years. And ultimately, it's really, how much of an impact can I, have on my, fellow man? How good can I be to, save people, which I, still think and thought that was a noble endeavor to take on. But, if you really want to hear the full story, that it actually starts, I must have just graduated high school and, I was messing around with City College, waiting tables, not really having any clear direction. And I ended up going to Kung Fu on the wrong day. And I misread because I had a history of martial arts and I want to get back into it. And in fact, there was an Aikido dojo open down the street. So, I didn't have anything else to do that afternoon. So I go and walk into the dojo and join the class and I get my ass kicked. It's this little guy, probably 5'3", and he just drills me into the ground over and over and over again. And I've never been, you could say, beat up like that before. And it wasn't like he was trying to hurt me, but it was actually being around somebody who expected more from me than I expected from myself. Almost that like he thought I could take it. The guy's name is Tatacho, and he's also part Native American. And I ended up moving in with him for about 9 months as his private student. He was living in the mountains actually with his family, no electricity or running water at the time. And I was living in like a canvas hunting tent with like a little fireplace for heat. He's in the mountains of California. So I'd get up in the morning, before the sun would come up, and start my training, the stars would still be up, and he would have me, running up and down hills with backpacks full of concrete. I would be, running up this hill and doing, it's Aikido. It's a sword-based martial art. So I'd be doing sword movements and katas. And it was kind of during this period of time where I really got a sense of how much I can be pushed. It was a sense of that I can take more than what I think I can take or what I've known myself to take. Almost like an expression of like love, like you can become bigger than you are. And this person become a really big mentor of mine, and I'm still really great friends with him. But he, showed me this whole new way of being in the world, this whole new way I could carry myself and like what's possible out of, what I'm able to accomplish.
Yeah, I mean that's incredible. So you live with him and train with him for 9 months.
Yeah.
And then what happens next?
So I was, very successful, student. He's had students before and they end up not being able to take it and not staying. But I was still really hungry in how far I could push myself. And there was this course called Senshusei course in Tokyo, Japan. And it's an international course, and it's a year-long intensive martial art course, and it's made for international students. So it's 12 months long, and you're actually training with the Japanese riot police. And it's based it's called Yoshinkan Aikido, a very militaristic, very hard style Aikido, like lots of yelling, lots of strikes, very, very traditional. And I essentially had a little bit of savings, and this opportunity came up. Within 4 weeks, the course was going to start. So I essentially shut down my whole life in the States. I emailed a friend of a friend of a friend who lived in Tokyo, who was kind enough to reserve a room, like a shoebox sized room for me just outside the city, and bought a plane ticket and flew out to go, join this course. Normally in Aikido, it takes maybe 6-7 years to get your black belt, but at the rate that we were training, it was 5 days a week, 7 hours a day, 8 hours a day, and absolutely no sick days. Like I had the flu, I still went and trained. I had mono at one point, I still went and trained. And lots of bowing, making the instructor's tea in the morning. And after, I think it was 10 and a half months, we got our black belt, given the exactitude of the standards and given the hours that we spent in the dojo. Wow. It was a really remarkable time. And it was during that period that I really I love working with people who work at a high level and who love what they do. And, the training was, brutal. Like there'd be blood on the mat and we're trying to knock each other out all day long. I fainted a couple times and you just keep going back. So that course ended. I flew back to the States and I started going back to City College. And I still didn't have a really clear picture of what I wanted to do. School was never really a strong suit for me. Growing up, some learning disabilities, ADHD and dyslexia. It was always difficult. And I kind of had a sense school just wasn't in the cards for me, going to get my master's or even regular university. What I did have growing up with my time studying martial arts in the mountains, and I met a couple other Vietnam veterans. And these guys who had, I've heard some of their stories. They've really seen some terrible, terrible things. And they've had to do some terrible, terrible things all, in the name of survival. But what each of them had was this really unique way that they looked at the world, that they dealt with problems. It was very action based. There wasn't always a whole lot of like drama, like something would happen, maybe a flat tire, or, the car would break down. They would just get into action and get it fixed or move on or find some other alternative. And I really wanted that view of the world for myself. I was curious on, what that could be for me. So I was, again, looking into the military. I was pretty sure I didn't want to kill people for a living. So, and then these veterans also said, don't join the Marines, don't join the Army. Looked a little bit at the Navy SEALs, and then I walked in the Air Force recruiter's office, and literally like right there's, those fold out flyers. There's a flyer of pararescue. And what pararescue is, it's the only asset of the Department of Defense, the DoD, that is specifically trained for combat search and rescue. The other units can do it, special forces, the SEALs, Rangers, and they do, execute search and rescue missions, but they're not specialized for that exact mission set. And, once I saw that flyer, like that was it for me. I knew like that's what I wanted to do. I didn't really know anything else other than they were like a special organization. And there were like pictures of guys jumping out the backs of planes and scuba diving and things like that on the flyer. But that just called me. Who I had known myself to be, Adam, like who I related to, who I saw in the mirror was a skinny white kid who did drama and art in high school. And I was curious enough at the time to wonder if, kind of almost as an experiment, could I actually transform myself into someone who was one of the best people in the world at saving people? Someone who could walk shoulder to shoulder with these other, huge, monster human beings who can do all this amazing stuff. I don't mean monster like a bad monster, but monster is just like a big human being, someone up to a lot.
Yeah.
And could I turn myself into someone like that? And so part of that journey of going into the military was to experiment and see, is this possible? Could I actually go do this thing? And I also didn't know how to swim, Adam. I was actually afraid of the water. And that is a big, big portion of what it takes to go through the pararescue training. Like a lot of our work takes place in the water. Those guys, you see the helicopter coming in over the ocean, the little guys with the flippers jump out of the helicopter into the water. Like that's what I did eventually. So I ended up finding some, adult swim classes at the local pool. I, also ended up moving to San Jose and joining an actual underwater hockey league, which is something I'd never heard of, but it is like an international, there's underwater hockey leagues in like many, many different countries. And for someone who hates holding their breath, hates being underwater, that was a big challenge I had to overcome to get used to that.
Okay, so far I've picked up on kind of two recurring themes, and one of them is certainly that you love to challenge yourself, and that's feels like an understatement saying it. The other is the sort of inspiration that you got from the other military guys that you had spent some time with,
Yeah.
about the way that they the way that they show up and how they're in action. And what really strikes me is that as you've told your story so far, you keep taking on these impossible tasks. And I keep finding myself wondering, like, why is he doing this? Like, why get up from the mat bleeding? Why go and do the underwater hockey thing? Like, what is driving you to go do these things?
Yeah. I I don't know. I don't know how to answer that, Adam. I can. There are big things that I'm really curious about, and I think that curiosity drives me to take on these big goals. And I think it's these big goals and big commitments. And I think it's out of actually making that big commitment that everything kind of falls out of that. If I make a big commitment, I'm now up to doing something that's, way larger than who I know myself to be. And then therefore I'm up to, pushing myself harder than what people may push themselves at. I'm up to, trying things that, normal people probably wouldn't try because I've got, a big commitment.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what keeps striking me with everything that you do is a quote unquote normal person like goes and makes these commitments, big commitments. Maybe they don't ultimately view them as commitments, but they might say, "Hey, I'm going to go set a goal, or I'm going to set an intention, or I'm going to
Yeah.
go do something." And then something else comes along, and it's like, "Oh, well, I guess I'll get to that someday," or like, "Yeah, just didn't work out. I'll just keep going down this path." But then there's you and people like you who are, as you put it, I think curiosity is a for me. I was like, yeah, okay, I buy that. That makes sense to me. Is that that curiosity plus your commitment, what I'm hearing, almost creates this space for now you to step into and you to grow into to
Yeah.
show yourself that, yeah, okay, great, I just did that. So my only choice, therefore, after I grow into this space that I just created is to go create more space to keep growing.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I would add on to that, it's setting up the environment in which I put myself. So the environment that I put myself in Tokyo for that year, I'm, training with primarily with 6 others, and we really depend upon each other to be there. And if I don't show up, that's a big impact on those people. So I've got to show up. Also, my, going into, pararescue into the military, I told everybody because, that cut out the exit door for me because there was no way I was going to not make it through and have to go back and tell everybody, hey, that big thing I said I was going to do. Yeah, I didn't do that. There was no way I was going to do that. So kind of being conscious about who I'm hanging out with, kind of the environment I'm getting myself into, and being as comfortable as possible in really uncomfortable situations where I might feel like I don't belong, or I'm certainly the least educated, least prepared person in the room. Being in those environments calls one to be bigger than who they know themselves to be.
So are you like the rest of us in that you still have the voice in your head who sometimes is like, Cody, you're crazy. Cody, you can't do this. Cody, you're going to fail. Cody, this is a terrible idea. Or have you just, does that not exist for you?
No, that person is alive and well, Adam. I'm having a conversation with that person right now. Yeah.
How have you learned to have a productive conversation with that person?
It's, we live in we actually live in two distinct realities. There's the reality of what's happening. These could be thought of like the facts of the matter. Like there's a table in front of me and I'm speaking to you on a screen. And then there's this other world called the world of interpretation or story that we also interact with. So, my interpretation of the story of today is the weather is good and the table I'm working at is, well-crafted wood table. That is all interpretation. And being able to see those worlds as distinct for yourself will start to give you some leverage against you could say, the voices or the interpretations you have going on in your head. So although there is that voice, there is that, drive to kind of put my head down and not do anything, I am aware that it's an interpretation. It's a story. And there's nothing wrong with interpretation. They're like really, really useful. And not only could we stop having interpretation. I mean, there's no way to stop, but it's part of what makes us unique. Part of what makes us, uniquely human. But if it's undistinguished, if you think your interpretation is a fact, then yeah, you're going to have a hard time getting outside of yourself. You're going to have a hard time breaking down some of your own barriers.
Yeah. Can you think of moments in your military career where you were really faced with those interpretations and that question? And in other words, where I'm trying to go with this is, can you think of moments where you had big breakthroughs in your, the word that's coming out for me is sort of power over that narrative and that story that helped you break through and go do the amazing stuff that you did as part of the military?
Yeah. It was at combat dive school. This probably would have been in 2007, maybe 2008. And part of the testing through combat dive school is they would strap your ankles together and then strap your wrists together behind your back. And then they would push you in a 13-foot pool. And the exercise we're doing is called drown proofing. So you're at the top of the water, you breathe out all your air, your weight brings you to the bottom of the pool, land on your feet, you push off, the head breaches the surface again, you get a big gulp of air, breathe out all your air, you go down. So it's an exercise called bobbing, and your hands are behind your back and your ankles are together. So in my first time down, after I just breathed out all my air, my feet actually slip on the tile at the bottom of the pool and I land on my side. And relaxing underwater has never been something I've been good at. Because I've been practicing this exercise for weeks, and never been successful. And I'm down there and I've got, I have a long conversation with myself in a very short period of time. And I essentially make the choice that I'm not, and it really is a clear choice, that I'm just not going to listen to that voice inside my head that's totally freaking out. And I just through will make my body relax, get my feet underneath me again, and push off the bottom of the pool. And I ended up being more relaxed. The exercise was much easier, even though they had us doing other things underwater. We're having to hold our breath and move and do all this stuff. But it was a point in my career where I actually got that I had a choice whether to listen to that voice or not. And in that exercise, it is possible to pass out underwater. Like, guys, it's not uncommon for guys to do that. And you have to choose that, like, that's okay. And to continue on anyways.
Wow.
Because that's what it takes.
Yeah. this is less related to our conversation today and more just pure curiosity. So
Okay.
guy passes out underwater, like
Yeah.
logistically, what happens? Is there a point at which they're like, oh, you know what, we got to go get this guy?
Yeah, they're instructors everywhere, and like they're wearing snorkels, and they're looking at like every move. And if a guy like starts like twitching, or suddenly like stops moving, or starts acting like really funny, I mean they're on him really quick. They bring him back up to the surface, put him on the side of the pool, give him some rescue breaths. The breathing starts again. It's not that you pass out underwater and like that's it. You just make sure you pass out and don't try and breathe in, because that's a whole other deal. But everybody in the career field is a paramedic, and so we've got really great medical support. And as far as I know, no one's died from that. They've died in training from other things, but not necessarily from that.
Yeah. Wow. Incredible. And so we could probably spend, I don't know, a couple hours talking about this, and maybe there's a book to write someday. I think I would love to read this book. And but we'll save that for something else. I'm going to fast forward us, I guess, 9 years into the future, and so now you're coming out of saving people professionally.
Yeah,
Where do you go next? Because I have to imagine that was just a massive experience to come out of.
yeah, yeah. You're leaving a really close brotherhood. You're leaving, a really clear purpose. Everything's also taken care of you in the military, like your housing. You get money for food, and also clothes, and like the mission's great. But I just had this sense, and I can't really describe it more than just a sense, that there was something else, that there was some other opportunity for me to grow into, some other way for me to expand. I was lucky enough to count myself among the best, the people that of the best in the world at saving people. But I had this sense, what does it actually look like to be the best at working in organizations or communities or governments, or systems, working with families that are in huge turmoil? And how can one go into those situations and bring the best outcome possible? And I didn't know necessarily where I was going to do that. I figured going back to university, going back to college, like I got the discipline now, I can actually go back to school. So I started applying for schools, and then an opportunity came up for me to go work for a philosopher in London. And this person was very well known for his work with groups and organizations, and in creating teams of like really high performing leaders. And this opportunity came up, and it was a lot like my time in Japan, where I just dropped everything. And so I essentially, 2 months out of the military, dropped everything in my life, got a plane ticket. And there's a little bit more to the story that I'm not going to get into, but I essentially dropped everything and moved out to London to start working for this individual. And it was one of the most difficult, challenging things I've ever done. And I've jumped out the back of airplanes in the middle of the night, in the middle of the ocean. And, that was easy compared to working for this individual. Whenever I read, there's a really great book called The Last Line. It's about Winston Churchill, and there's some passages in there on what it was like working for him in World War II. And I mean, the guy was a genius, but the work was really intense, like really exacting. And whenever I read those passages, my heart rate picks up a little bit, because that was a lot of what my experience was working in London.
Yeah, and so in the military, you made some massive commitments, went and did some incredible, challenging things. Now you're coming into a different type of experience, but the same thing is happening. I want to I want to talk about some of those experiences just a little bit in terms of the learnings that have come from them. But what
Hmm.
I'm also reflecting on right now is you're the instructor that you met early on in your
Hmm.
life that you go and you live with, the way that you found yourself going into the military. This opportunity seemingly presents itself. I I guess I don't totally know where I'm going with this, to be honest, but
Okay.
it's just fascinating that these events keep showing up for you. And I have a little bit of a belief that in life these events are showing up for us all the time. The question is, are you open to seeing those doors open, if you will?
Yeah.
And so is this something that you've kind of always been aware of or have developed, or like when they come along, do you get a different feeling? I guess that's what I'm trying to get into, is like, how do you decipher these holy cow massive growth opportunities from just other stuff that's presenting itself to you on a day-to-day basis?
I Adam, I hate speaking in like ethereals, like a wish, or, and I'm going to say a phrase that I think sounds totally lame, but I don't have, any other words to describe it better, but it's something like my heart is telling me like this is the right move. And again, I don't like speaking in ethereal terms, but it really is my experience of what it's like when one of these opportunities comes. It's like, okay, sometimes I don't even want to do it. And it's like, this is just what I got to do now. Like, this is, where Cody needs to go.
I get it. I totally get that. I get that. Okay. All right. So now you go and you're working for this philosopher in London who shows you a whole new world of possibility.
Yeah.
What were some of your biggest learnings that came out of that experience that you still use in your life today?
A lot. And I'll probably be discovering learnings out of that experience for the rest of my life. I would say I'm less tied to who I know myself to be. So I'm less tied to, Cody is this particular way. And I certainly do have ways that I prefer, but less tied to having to be that or having that be the end of the story. Not that that makes things much easier, Adam. Like, I've got my hands full in, I mean, really, I'm in the beginning of my third career here, in having to learn that, in having to uh, reinvent myself again into this, new arena, into really a whole new way of being. Right now, who I am is not enough to succeed in what I'm doing. I'm, dead clear on that.
Mm.
And it's going to take me getting out of my own way. It's going to take me doing work. It's going to take me, standing for something big in order for me to actually succeed and do what I, see as possible.
Do you have any sense? Do you have any
Go.
sense of what that big thing is that you are going to stand for next? Has it shown itself yet to your heart?
No, it has not. And I've been confronted with that because, once I see that, or, once I've got that really clear picture of where I want to go, things really click into place. And right now, I don't necessarily have that. And, it is possible that maybe this is just part of the journey. This is just, what I need to go through in order to, get to where I need to actually be.
Yeah, it's like what just came up for me is the space in between. And I think on the one hand, a lot of people probably get there and then they just kind of stay there. Whereas you're a guy, through the story that you've told us so far about you, is one who that the next thing shows up, or you create it, maybe it's a different way to put it. What do you, so you're in maybe in one of those betweens right now where I think you're still up to some pretty big stuff with the way that you work with organizations
Yeah.
and things like that. And you still know that there's something else, that next big thing coming. Does that sound right?
I'm suspicious that it's coming.
I like it. Okay.
And, I don't want to get trapped in thinking that I just need to like wait for it to reveal itself. I think that's, I just don't think that's the right move. So, I'm still like looking, still being curious on what's out there, seeing where I need to grow to make the biggest contribution that I can make.
Yeah. Okay. I'd love to come back to, I was kind of exploring some of the writing that you've done online. And
Oh, no.
one thing that I came across was where you're talking about how to use powerful and direct language.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what that means to you?
Yeah. It's not lying about what's so. It's not trying to pretend that things are different than the way they are. A crude way to put that is, call the baby ugly when it's ugly and own up to what the current circumstances are, own up to, how one can be responsible for those circumstances. Being able to use language powerfully. Our whole world arises from language. That again, like I was sharing earlier, how we make meaning out of everything. We create our world out of language. We create our meaning out of language. And if you're unaware of that, or if you're lazy about that, or if you haven't educated yourself in that, I think you're missing out on something really big. You're missing out on something really powerful.
Yeah. I'd love to maybe give our listeners something that they could try or play with that's sort of in this zone of how we create ourselves or the stories that we tell ourselves, or maybe it's about powerful language. Do you have any good exercises or things that people could try to sort of like get a sense of what this stuff means? Like, in other words, can they apply it in their day-to-day life right now?
Yeah, if there's an area where someone's feeling stuck, or if there's an area where they might have an upset in their life, trying to break down what are the facts of the matter and what are the interpretations. You could say, what are they making it mean? And, dwelling in that those are actually two distinct areas. So dwelling in, I'm really upset right now, but, if I look around, do I actually see any upset? No, I don't see any upset out here. There actually is no upset in the world. Oh, man, I'm really frustrated right now. Oh, no, there's no frustrated in the world. And be curious about that. Like, oh, what's that about? Yeah, that's what I would invite people to do.
I like that. Okay, so if also for frustration for me is also like a feeling. Like if I feel
Yeah.
frustrated, is that different
I don't
or
know.
is that
Is it
related?
like look around? Do you see feelings anywhere?
I see a smiling face,
You do see a smiling face.
so you must be happy.
No, what you see is a smiling face. That's the facts of the matter. My lips are in a shape in which you see a certain pattern of teeth. That's the facts of the matter. And you're not wrong about making the interpretation. You're not inaccurate about making that interpretation. But if you start confusing that interpretation as it really is that way, you could get yourself in trouble. I'm not saying you will get yourself in trouble, but you could get yourself in trouble.
Yeah, I'm really reflecting on going back to the all the different conversations that are happening at any point in time in our heads or inside of us, and how easy it can be at times to let those conversations become the prevailing story, especially about who we are, right?
Yeah.
Like I've told myself the story that I'm not good enough for most of my life, you know, and I could probably go back to when I was a little kid and think back to when I started telling myself the "you're not good enough" story, right?
Yeah.
And I can use that to, I've used it to motivate me to be better. I've also used it to stay safe and play small, you
Yeah.
know. Is that kind of what you're getting at with the stories?
Yeah. And that's a great example of using it to motivate you. So, you know, you've got it distinguished for yourself at a certain level. And once it's distinguished for yourself, another way to see that is once you can see it, you've got a little bit more of your hands on the levers and dials of what it is. So you can either use it to motivate you or at least acknowledge when you're using it to, keep you at the level you're currently at.
Yeah.
So it's in this inquiry where you can start to get your arms around, what is this meaning? What is this language that I'm using? How does it actually impact that? You can start to get access to creating your world, creating, really inventing yourself.
Yeah. So I'm reflecting on our conversation so far today, and what one story that somebody might tell themselves about you in the conversation so far is, wow, this Cody guy must be always on all the time, always going, always growing. Like, how on earth does he have energy to do this? And so what I'd be curious about is, like, what role does rest and recovery and self-care, whatever you want to label it as, how does that show up in your life?
It shows up a lot in my life, and certainly in the last couple of years, it's kind of taken front stage for me. I've had to manage depression one way or another for 20 years or so. I would say actively realizing that this is something that I have, and getting therapy and medication is something I've been doing for probably the last 10 years. But sleep is huge for me. Getting enough sleep, that makes a big difference. Exercise, I do meditation, I do journaling, I do cold plunges. I throw as much against the wall and see what sticks. And it's also taken me years to build up those practices as well. It's not just, I started those and they were there to support me. It took like years and years and years to have meditation be like a standard practice for me. It took me years and years and years to have my sleep be effective. So giving myself some grace, giving myself some slack on not taking care of myself is also really beneficial.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say thank you for being here today with us and being so generous with sharing your story and your learnings along the way and everything that you've been through. You're somebody who inspires me tremendously to continue to push the boundaries of
Thanks, Adam.
who is Adam. And yeah, just thank you so much for being here today.
Great. It was my pleasure, and I learned a couple things. Thank you.
All right, man. We'll talk soon.
All right.
Thank you so much for tuning in today on this episode of The Atom Experiment. If you're enjoying this episode and want more, I'm sure you figured out by now how to subscribe to this podcast. Would love to have you along. Of course, your review would also mean the world to me. If you're interested in hearing more about the topics related to how we can unlock and unleash our ultimate potential, then I definitely recommend you stop by atomexperiment.com to go and sign up. There's a newsletter that goes out multiple times per week. It's also where you'll get the latest and greatest on the podcast and where I share some of my personal stories, my personal experiments, and other learnings throughout the week for you to follow along and hopefully find some things that you can experiment with on your own. Thanks again for tuning in today. I hope you have an incredible day and look forward to having you back next time on The Atom Experiment.